Good morning, everyone. My name is Cliff Smith. I'm the Washington Project Director of the Middle East Forum, and as our logo suggests, we promote America's interests in the Middle East. One of the ways to do that, the slogan of our founder is, radical Islam is the problem, moderate Islam is the solution. So that has actually led us to doing some things that are not traditionally our main focus outside the Middle East, including on South Asia and the radical group Jamaat-e-Islami. We've been doing a lot of research and writing on this group, and it has led us to being involved politically here in D.C. in promoting efforts to recognize the threat from Jamaat and to prevent the danger that comes associated with it. Because of that, we've collected this collection of scholars to discuss the issue, and Congressman Jim Banks, who introduced each Res 160, of which called attention to this threat and points out Jamaat's many bad deeds. We'll be talking here later as well. In the meantime, I will let you all hear from our panelists. We'll have a period of questions and answers afterwards. But we will start with my friend Seth Oldmixon from Liberty South Asia. Seth has lived in South Asia, is a true expert in the region, and has been doing a lot of research on Jamaat for quite some time. So Seth.
Thank you, Cliff. 9/11 made al-Qaeda a household name, and with it, an introduction for most Americans to radical Islamism, a totalitarian, theocratic ideology that demands global subservience to a cabal of religious clerics. With the rise of ISIS, most people began to understand that al-Qaeda is not the only violent extremist group in operation, nor was it the first. Another Islamist extremist group, Jamaat-e-Islami, was founded in 1941 by the fundamentalist cleric Abu al-Maududi, and has active chapters in countries across South Asia and, in fact, the world. But Jamaat is not a household name like al-Qaeda or ISIS, or even Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, with which Jamaat shares a close connection. So who is Jamaat-e-Islami? What do they believe? What do they want, and what are they willing to do to get it? In 1939, in a speech titled Jihad in Islam, Maulana Maududi laid clear the objective of his ideology, which he said, quote, seeks to alter the social order of the whole world and rebuild it in conformity with its own tenets and ideals. Maududi went on to explain that his goal was to destroy all states and governments anywhere on the face of the earth which are opposed to the ideology and program of Islam, saying that Islam requires the earth, not just a portion, but the whole planet. How did he plan on achieving this lofty goal? In his word, the objective of Islamic jihad is to eliminate the rule of an un-Islamic system and establish instead an Islamic system of state rule. Now, of course, we know that these beliefs do not reflect those of the vast majority of the world's Muslims. In fact, it is peace-loving Muslims throughout the world who have suffered the most from this type of violent ideology. But this is what the founder of Jamaat-e-Islami believed, the goals he outlined 80 years ago. Jamaat-e-Islami's guiding ideology and its goal of establishing a global theocracy have not changed from Maulana Maududi's original vision. In fact, Jamaat-e-Islami leader Siraj al-Haq, who coincidentally happens to hold a seat in Pakistan's parliament today, in the Senate, wrote in 2013 that Maulana Maududi has clearly defined jihad and extolled his followers to please read the book Jihad in Islam that I just quoted from a few minutes ago. In 2015, Siraj al-Haq wrote that Jamaat-e-Islami will continue to strive for the implementation of Islamic system as per the vision of Syed Maududi, inshallah. In 2005, another Jamaat-e-Islami leader, Mir Qasim Ali, addressed an assembly of Islami Chhatra Shibir, Jamaat-e-Islami's violent student wing in Bangladesh. During this speech, he predicted the re-establishment of an Islamic caliphate and called on Chhatra Shibir members to be frontline soldiers in bringing about what he termed the end of heathen Western civilization. Jamaat-e-Islami's goal of forcibly transforming the world to meet their vision of a so-called Islamic state was echoed again in 2016 by Siraj al-Haq, while saying funeral prayers for a terrorist convicted of assassinating Punjab Governor Salman Taseer the Jamaat leader prayed for Allah to grant Jamaat-e-Islami the power to enforce Sharia across the globe, a goal for which he declared that he and his followers were ready to sacrifice their lives. The Jamaat-e-Islami's penchant for violence was perhaps best exhibited during Bangladesh's War of Independence in 1971. Jamaat-e-Islami was enlisted by the Pakistan Army to serve as militant proxies. During this time, an estimated 3 million people were murdered, including the country's leading intellectuals. Women, too, were targeted, not only with death, but with sexual violence. Lisa Ghazi's new award-winning film, Rising Silence, documents the plight of hundreds of thousands of women abducted and held in rape camps by the Pakistani forces and their local collaborators. But one doesn't have to look back to the 1970s to find examples of Jamaat violence. The State Department's 2013 report on international religious freedom in Bangladesh noted that according to the main domestic human rights organization, Ain Osalich Kendra, which publishes annual statistics on violence against religious minorities, 495 statues, monasteries, or temples were destroyed, 278 homes and 208 businesses were destroyed, 188 persons were injured, and 1 person was killed during that 1 year. The State Department goes on to note that local, international press, human rights organizations, and community leaders blamed Islami Chhatra Shibir, the violent student wing of Jamaat-e-Islami. Hundreds of Jamaat-e-Islami attacks against Bangladesh's religious minorities have shaken the country to its core in recent years, in what observers have called a coordinated campaign by Islamist extremists to destroy the country's democracy and cleanse it of religious minorities. Jamaat-e-Islami has been linked to Al-Qaeda, has played a key role in both the Afghan Jihad and Kashmir Jihad. In a 2012 television interview in Pakistan, Jamaat-e-Islami leader Munawar Hassan said, and I quote, "I salute the Afghan Taliban. They have defeated America and they have destroyed NATO. It is written all over the mountains. Go America, go. They have humiliated America." Later, in the same program, he said that he believes Osama bin Laden is a great shaheed, an Islamic martyr. In 2013, Munawar Hassan wrote on social media that Muslim youth will argue that victory is earned through bullet after episode of Afghan jihad that has defeated the military muscle of the West. Hassan later posted a photo of American flag-draped coffins of American soldiers, alongside the words, "Afghanistan has become a graveyard for America." Siraj al-Haq echoes this celebration of the deaths of American soldiers. In 2013, he posted on social media that we are proud to have taken part in the Afghan jihad, and the result was that no more USSR exists, and we will see the same fate of USA. At a Jamaat-e-Islami rally in 2016, supporters chanted, "The cure to India is nothing but jihad." The rally was attended by top leaders of Jamaat-e-Islami, alongside the leadership of another organization, Hizbul Mujahideen. It's important to note that a few months after this, Hizbul Mujahideen was officially designated a global terrorist organization by the United States. Jamaat-e-Islami remains undesignated. Just last month, Siraj al-Haq addressed another rally of supporters during which he proclaimed that jihad is the only solution to the dispute over Kashmir. In fact, in 2012, Jamaat-e-Islami's official social media account, Verified, declared that jihad is our way and death for the sake of God is the highest of our aspirations. And yet, despite decades of evidence that Jamaat-e-Islami is a violent extremist organization that poses a threat to American allies and American interests in the world, they continue to operate, relatively unknown and certainly underappreciated outside of South Asia. We allow this to continue at our peril. The South Asia Democratic Forum in Brussels explained in a 2015 policy brief that the short-term as well as long-term threat potential of Jamaat-e-Islami cannot be overemphasized. It is foolish to view this economic and political colossus as a pushover just because they lack a strong electoral base. It is not alarmist to claim that Jamaat-e-Islami, if kept unchecked, has the potential to slowly but surely put an end to secularism and democracy in Bangladesh. 30 years ago, the world saw the fall of another totalitarian ideology as the Berlin Wall came crumbling down, amid cheers from people living on both sides. Those in the free world who have been fighting to amplify the voices and secure the basic human rights of those suffering under the oppression of communism. And those on the inside who courageously struggled at great cost to free their own society of that totalitarian menace. Today, we face a similar fight against another transnational organization. Organizations with shared agenda of putting an end to democracy and replacing it with a totalitarian, theocratic state. They pursue this goal by exploiting legal and democratic processes with the intention of undermining and ultimately removing them. And they encourage, condone, justify, and support the commission of violent acts to achieve their political, ideological, and social goals. It's the very definition of violent extremism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seth. Next, we'll hear from Nadeem Nusrat. He is the chairman of South Asian Minorities Alliance Foundation. Originally from Pakistan, he's been fighting the rights of religious and ethnic minorities in South Asia very much as well. Nadeem.
Thank you, Dave. I'm glad we, after many, many years, many people in the US and now are paying attention to the issue of Jamaat-e-Islami and the important role it has played in promoting extremism, not only in South Asia but also in the Middle East as well as now in the USA. The list of the things which Jamaat-e-Islami has done to harm humanity, especially in South Asia, is quite long. And just to give a personal example, when I was a young student in Karachi, in my first week of starting my college education, I was kidnapped by the hooligans of Jamaat-e-Islami student wing, Islami Jamiat-e-Talaba. They wanted me to join their ranks when I refused, and I had an argument that I am a secular person and I have a choice to make, which is to work for secular ideas, or at least to stay neutral and not to join any Islamic organization's rank. I was kidnapped, threatened, and I had to stay quiet for a long time until I changed the institution I was studying at. Jamaat-e-Islami, because when I was growing up in Karachi, we could see the signs all over. It is an organization which shared striking resemblance with the teachings of Muslim Brotherhood or Ikhwanul Muslimin, which started by Hassan al-Banna in Egypt in 1928. If you look at the organic environment in which both Jamaat-e-Islami and Ikhwanul Muslimin grew, it was pretty much the same. The British colonial rule in India and British colonial rule in Egypt. They both started against the so-called evils in the society. They took this position that they want to purify the society. And they have a way of working. For example, if you look at the way they go from nowhere to become a very credible organization, or rather very powerful militant organization, they have replicated the same model, which starts with the personal transformation. Unlike political parties, they do not address political rallies. They start with personal reformation of an individual. And this is how both organizations have laid down the way they should actually create influence within the society. So from individual, the goal is transform an individual and then expect the person to transform their family. And once the individuals and families are there, the next goal is to transform the society. And then comes the ultimate goal, which is to transform the state eventually leading the Muslim Ummah or the Muslim nation to establish the word of Allah by establishing Khilafah throughout the world. The way Jamaat-e-Islami works is requires a lot of attention, because I have seen in Karachi, the Karachi I grew up was a very, very secular, it still remains one of the most secular regions in Pakistan. But if you, like me, if you are one of the people from there, I saw women without hijab or scarf or niqab all my life in Karachi until I was able to live and until the eyesight was not trying to kill me. So, the transformation is that from women who were very secular, Karachi, where the bars were open and people were able to enjoy a life as you would enjoy in any Western city, people became more and more orthodox, more and more traditionalist, more and more conservative, and eventually the society changed. And if you visit Karachi now, it is hard to recognize the city now. The same happened in other parts of Pakistan. Jamaat-e-Islami was able to find in General Ziaul-Haq, the Pakistani military general who took power in 1977 by deposing an elected government. And then one war started, which soon turned into a jihad, and Jamaat-e-Islami found in Ziaul-Haq a perfect ally. And using General Ziaul-Haq, they transformed the most powerful institution in Pakistan, which is Pakistani military. Pakistani military, which, as Seth just alluded to, was involved in a large-scale massacre in Bangladesh, the rape of 250,000 plus women, which is documented by the Red Cross. And then in the late 1970s and in late 1980s, Jamaat-e-Islami found in Ziaul-Haq, as I said, an ally, and the Pakistani military, which was a very secular professional institution, soon turned into a jihadist political military machine, and that remains the case. The political institutions in Karachi, for example, where we never saw a gun, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, we saw the arrival of the Kalashnikovs, thanks to General Ziaul-Haq and Jamaat-e-Islami nexus. The Jamaat activists were able to carry lethal weapons, terrorize people, and try to establish their writ by force. Why it is important for the US? Again, from the same perspective as we have seen in Pakistan. The Jamaat revolution, very similar to Muslim Brotherhood, it works slowly, it takes its time, but then it becomes so strong that it becomes a huge challenge for any state, as we have seen in the case of Egypt as well as in Pakistan, and now we are witnessing the same problem in Bangladesh, and I'm glad the state is taking it very seriously. The killings of a lot of bloggers over there who were secular in nature, it would have continued if the current government hadn't put an end to this. So, if you look at, again, the connection between Jamaat-e-Islami and its role here, if you do a little bit of research, you will find that most of the perpetrators of 9/11 tragedies, they were found in Pakistan from the homes of the Jamaat-e-Islami leadership. It is very hard to separate Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Jamaat-e-Islami, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Lashkar-e-Jhangvi. They are all in one. And again, Maulana Maududi, if you study his teaching, which I have done extensively, as well as Hassan al-Banna's teachings, again you will find striking resemblance, and which is that it expects every Muslim to transform themselves, transform their family, and then establish the rule of the Lord, the Creator, Allah, and it becomes their duty. So this politicization of Islam and turning Islam into a way of governance rather than a personal means of salvation, rather than a choice of religion, Jamaat-e-Islami has made into a religious obligation. It will be very dangerous to ignore the rise of Jamaat-e-Islami, not in the US but throughout the world. It is something which sooner or later will come and haunt the world. So the sooner we take an action, the better would it be. And again, a lot of religious intolerance we are witnessing in South Asia is down to the teachings of Jamaat-e-Islami. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nadeem. Next up is Abha Shankar. She is the Director of Research for the Investigative Project on Terrorism, and she also is the author of a very large report on Islamic Circle of North America, which is Jamaat's chief proxy group here in the United States.
Thank you, Seth. So my colleague Sam and I, we are going to be focusing on Jamaat-e-Islami network in the United States. Jamaat-e-Islami has a long and active presence in the United States. Earlier this year, the Investigative Project on Terrorism put together a report on the Islamic Circle of North America, which is Jamaat-e-Islami's most prominent outpost in the United States. I'll start with sharing some of the key findings from our report, and then I'll go a little bit into ICNA's activism in regards to Kashmir, because it's just been such a hot topic of debate in recent months, and finally close with ICNA's ties to Turkey's Islamist leadership. So let me start by sharing with you some of the key findings from our report. Number one, ICNA's founding leadership has deep roots in the Jamaat-e-Islami. This is showcased in a 2018 presentation by former ICNA President Muhammad Yunus, which was put together to commemorate the organization's 50th anniversary in the United States. In the presentation, Yunus states that Jamaat brothers from South Asia, they traveled to the United States and they thought of setting up a Jamaat, or an organization, that would share the goals and methodology of a true Islamic movement. This led to the creation of ICNA in New York in 1968. Jamaat-e-Islami founder, Maulana Abu Ala Maududi, attended ICNA's inaugural public event at Columbia University in 1974. Number two, ICNA's ideology mirrors that of the Jamaat-e-Islami. Maududi preached that wherever you are, in whichever country you reside, you must seize the powers of government and rule the affairs of the state in accordance with God's laws. The name of the striving is jihad. ICNA's numerous publications, including a 2010 Members Handbook, states its mission is the establishment of Ikamat ad-Din, which is establishment of the religion in North America. The Jamaat-e-Islami believes in Islamic revolution with the ultimate goal of establishing a global Islamic superstate ruled by Sharia. And Nadeem did kind of mention about it being a gradual process, starting with the individual, going on to the society, the state, and finally an Islamic superstate that encompasses the entire world. And this is exactly what is preached by ICNA at its conventions, at its events, and in its publications. Number three, ICNA's radical leadership not only has deep-rooted ties to the Jamaat-e-Islami, but has glorified jihad and martyrdom and speaks in support of Islamists and Islamist movements. In 2016, ICNA's former Vice President Ashraf Usman Khan was tried in absentia by a Bangladeshi war crimes tribunal and sentenced to death. The tribunal said that Khan was the commander-in-chief of the Al-Badr killing squad, which is a militant offshoot of Jamaat-e-Islami. Khan allegedly participated in the murder of 18 Bangladeshi intellectuals during the country's 1971 liberation war. ICNA has issued strongly worded condemnations over executions of Jamaat-e-Islami leaders convicted by the Bangladeshi War Crimes Tribunal. Following the execution of Jamaat-e-Islami leader Abdul Qadir Mullah, for example, a press release quoted then ICNA President Nadeem Beg saying, "This is a political murder and a dark day of justice." Mullah was accused of a number of horrific war crimes that included mass killings. ICNA's pro-terrorism and Islamist messaging that is most prominently showcased in its flagship publication, Message International. In the Message International, numerous articles, including those by ICNA members, support jihad in Kashmir and Palestine, defend terrorists and other radicals, and advocate for Islamist and Islamist movements. The January 2000 issue, for example, features glowing profiles on leading Islamist ideologues of the 20th century, including Maududi, Muslim Brotherhood luminaries, Hassan al-Banna, Sayyid Qutb, and Iranian Ayatollah Khomeini. So there's a lot of overlap in the ideology of Jamaat-e-Islami and Muslim Brotherhood. The 1997 issue included a full-page interview with the now designated Hizbul Mujahideen commander, Sayyid Salahuddin, that describes him as, in quotes, undisputed leader of the Mujahideen struggling to liberate the territory of Kashmir from brutal Indian occupation. Hizbul Mujahideen is a militant offshoot of Jamaat-e-Islami and has been responsible for several terror attacks in Jammu and Kashmir. ICNA's activism in Kashmir continues to this day. ICNA conventions feature high-profile US-based Kashmiri separatist leaders and activists, such as convicted Pakistani spy and lobbyist Ghulam Nabi Farooq, and excoriate India for what it calls state-sponsored terrorism in Kashmir. Soon after the Indian action on August 5 that divided Jammu and Kashmir into two federally administered territories by avoiding a temporary constitutional provision, ICNA's social justice arm published exaggerated and unsubstantiated reports on the, in quotes, deteriorating human rights situation in Kashmir. An ICNA flyer calling for a September 27th rally to protest the Indian action states, and I quote, 10 million Kashmiris imprisoned in their homes by 800,000 Indian forces, 50 killed, 200 blinded, 5,000 injured in 10 days. There have been no credible reports, and I repeat, no credible reports of mass casualties, so I'm not sure where this information is coming from. So there's been a lot of misinformation and propaganda from Jamaat-e-Islami front groups here. Ties to Turkey. ICNA has close ties to Turkey and its Islamist leadership. The IPT earlier exposed how the Union of NGOs of the Islamic World, which is an Istanbul-based international network of Islamist and terror-tied organizations, serves as a key agency used by the Turkish government to sponsor and coordinate activities of the Jamaat-e-Islami and its North American affiliates. ICNA's overseas charitable arm, that you'll be hearing more about from Sam, the Helping Hand for Relief and Development, and Kashmiri American Council that is led by Ghulam Nabi Farooq, are US-based UNIW members and work closely with the umbrella group to coordinate activities with Jamaat-e-Islami Pakistan and the Al-Khidmat Foundation, which is the charitable arm of Jamaat-e-Islami in Pakistan. Helping Hand's regional partners have been found to have ties to US-designated terrorist entities, including Hizbul Mujahideen and components of the Abha, which again Sam is going to expand on. I want to wrap up by saying evidence showcased in the FPT report and other investigations, including those by the Middle East Forum, raises troubling questions about ICNA's history and purpose. ICNA's propagation of an Islamist ideology and grand ambition to establish a global caliphate, close ties with Jamaat-e-Islami and Kashmiri jihadist groups make it something very different from a mainstream religious organization. In light of these revelations, Congressman Banks' resolution calling for ending partnership and funding to ICNA and its charitable fronts is a step in the right direction. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Abha. Last up is Sam Westrop. Sam Westrop is the director of Islamist Watch, which is a project of the Middle East Forum. He's done extensive research on Jamaat-e-Islami, in particular its branches outside of South Asia, in America, in Europe, and so on. Sam.
Thank you, Cliff. Here in DC, as in London or Paris or any other Western capital, when you speak to policymakers, it's very easy to convince them of the iniquities of Jamaat when you point to its violence in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, elsewhere. It's very difficult to convince policymakers and their staff of the threat posed by Jamaat here in the West. And that is because Jamaat operates primarily lawfully in the Western world. That is not to say we should not be concerned. And one thing I like to do with a self-evident bias is always look to Europe to see what America should anticipate in 10 years' time. I've long been of the belief that what happens, especially in Britain and in France and Germany, is a harbinger of what may happen here in just a few years from now. And Jamaat paints a very worrying picture The UK offers the most vivid example. Just 20, 30 years ago, Muslim community institutions in the UK were run by pretty much no one because Islam was localized. One borough would be run by Jamaat-e-Islami, another by a moderate Sufi group, another by some quietist Salafi organization. There was no overall control. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, Salman Rushdie happened. And with the furor around Salman Rushdie, Islamist groups around the world competed to be the most outraged. They wanted to show that they were leading the Muslim world's opposition to this author and his blasphemous work. This was helped by foreign money from Saudi, from Iran, from all around the world. Jamaat-e-Islami in Europe largely won the battle of utmost outrage. They succeeded in gathering Muslims of all different types, of all different politics and schools of theology and thought under their banner. They led the marches through London, through Manchester. They helped organize marches in America, in the rest of Europe. Jamaat-e-Islami suddenly became a force in the West at a time when only those who studied the intricacies, the minutiae of South Asian politics knew anything about them. Suddenly, Jamaat had control. This coincided with new policies in Europe about multiculturalism ideas in which communities would be deputized to run their own welfare programs, their own systems of kind of local responsibility and self-government. In other words, healthcare, community functions, youth groups, that kind of thing. The government would give money and political power to religious and racial communities to run their own affairs to some extent. So they said to the Muslims, who is your leader? And in the wake of Salman Rushdie, Muslims knew very well who their leader was, so Jamaat-e-Islami stepped forward. And the moderate Muslim groups, not having enough power, not having the mandate, just couldn't oppose them. So across Europe, and especially in Britain, Jamaat took control. Now, this rather long story is all to say that what has happened as a result of that? Well, fast forward to the Syrian civil war, the rise of ISIS in both Syria and Iraq. And what did the British government note? That where did the recruits to the Islamic State and other terror groups, where were they coming from? They were coming from, especially in the UK, from parts of East London controlled by Jamaat. They had gone through Jamaati youth groups, they had been involved with Jamaati charities, Jamaati organizations. Jamaat's influence had helped breed a generation of recruits to ISIS. Now, this is not to say the recruits did not come from other parts of the Islamist spectrum. Of course they did. But Jamaat was the one constant in most of these recruits' lives. This is what America has to look forward to unless the threat of Jamaati ideology is not taken more seriously. It's very hard in this country to encourage policymakers and the media to investigate an ideology and its ideologues. For obvious reasons. It has the First Amendment protections here like nothing Europe has. And that's important and not something we should, of course, seek to transgress. But we can still be deeply concerned about the effect and the presence of a theocratic ideology that is quickly gathering more and more control over American Islam just as it did over European Islam. And just a few examples. As I say, America doesn't have the scale of the problem that Europe does. But Abha quite clearly explained the threat and the danger posed by the Islamic Circle of North America. But just a quick look at their activities show how they have flourished in the absence of something like multiculturalism policy, how they have found a way to still advance themselves within American communities. So look at community centers all across the US. Within Muslim communities, they're run by ICNA. Look at the youth groups, look at local charities, look at food banks. ICNA is involved. And this is a long, key part of the Islamist strategy, tactics, is to use the long traditions, the good and benevolent traditions of alms and zakat and charity within Islam to advance their own political agenda. It's how the Muslim Brotherhood rose to the fore in Egypt. It's how Jamaat is advancing itself here in the US. So all across the US, Jamaat is doing exactly what it did in Europe 20, 30 years ago. It is using and misusing welfare and charitable infrastructure to advance itself. This means that a generation of kids, Muslim kids, who may not have parents at all involved in the Jamaati tradition, are nonetheless coming into contact with an extremist ideology and being told this is what moderate Islam looks like, this is what true Islam looks like. This is radicalization, and this is happening all across the country. And because there has never been an interest in Jamaat, everyone knows, I think Seth pointed out, everyone knows the Muslim Brotherhood, everyone's heard of the Salafis and Al-Qaeda. Who's heard of Jamaat outside maybe a few people in this room? But we really need to understand what Jamaat is and how it operates, because a whole generation of kids are being taught these ideas. Now, the last thing I'll say is, let's just look at the quick consequences of that already. We may not have Jamaati recruits running off to join the Islamic States or any other terror group around the world, but we are seeing it in other forms, extremely dangerous forms. So, terror finance is the most obvious. Last year, 2017, ICNA has a May relief branch. It's called Helping Hand for Relief and Development. This is their overseas charitable arm. Raises tens and tens of millions of dollars every year. They openly partnered in Pakistan with Lashkar-e-Taiba. And in fact, they've partnered with Lashkar-e-Taiba and its political manifestations as well, both of which are banned under US law as terrorist organizations. They openly partnered with this group, which was responsible for the 2008 Mumbai attacks, among others, has killed scores, hundreds, thousands of people. And curiously, there has been no federal investigation, none. Representative Banks' resolution calls for further scrutiny of this, and that was welcome and good. But there has been no investigation of this flagrant breach of US criminal law. It's not the only time that Jamaat domestic organizations have partnered with groups linked to terror. I think Al-Kidmat was mentioned earlier. This is the, I believe that was you, this is the official welfare arm of Jamaat-e-Islami. Al-Kidmat openly funds Hizbul Mujahideen, the paramilitary group linked to Jamaat-e-Islami, and even Hamas. In fact, its funding of Hamas is so open that it actively says on Al-Kidmat's website, we are sending money to Hamas. When it comes to evidence for terror finance, you don't get much clearer than that. And Al-Kidmat is the perennial partner, the standard partner of ICNA, ICNA Relief, the domestic relief arm of Jamaat here in the US. These ties are open and obvious and clear. Just last month in Connecticut, or 2 months ago, in Connecticut, a man was convicted in federal court, Fareed Khan. He was convicted of lying to the FBI. The investigations was much broader than that. The FBI had been looking at the transfer of medical equipment to Pakistan by this man, Fareed Khan, to his brother, who would send him money to purchase medical equipment. The brother is a strong supporter of Lashkar-e-Taiba. It seems that the FBI is looking into some sort of Pakistani terror finance ring, and Fareed Khan was the first casualty in this investigation. Fareed Khan is the New England coordinator for ICNA, or one of the coordinators for ICNA and for Helping Hand for Relief and Development. This is not a coincidence. Jamaat is tied into terror finances as part of its infrastructure. It's been able to get away with it for decades because no one has been looking. With this resolution, that's changing. And now what we really need to do is have policymakers, journalists, the public at large, start to say, Jamaat is present throughout the US. It is involved in terror finance. It is involved in extremism and radicalization. What are we going to do about it? I'm going to give you one last thought. The most important thing the federal government could stop doing right now is funding Jamaat-e-Islami. Since 2007, the Middle East Forum has identified $12 million of taxpayer funds that have worked their way to Jamaat, mostly through its aid activities. The first thing we can do to no longer legitimize Jamaat as somehow the face of American Islam is stop handing over taxpayers' dollars. There's plenty more that can be done, and I hope we're joining all of me in convincing policymakers that they should be worried about this as much as we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Congressman Banks will be here any minute to give his remarks. He's just leading a classified briefing. But in the meantime, we'd like to take questions. So if anybody has any questions for the panel, raise your hand.
Yes, my name is Omar Islam, and actually my full name is Advocate Seth Islam. And I was a prosecutor in the ICTBD of Bangladesh. And I was so fortunate, I've been so lucky to work as a prosecutor there for 11 crime cases, starting from Ghulam Azam's to H.D. Azhar. Connecting to those cases, I was fortunate to visit a lot of places of occurrence and victims' families till now. One instance that I wanted to take in what is called Widow's Village near Bamaching. Part of my investigation to do this case, I went there and I met 42 women. Those were raped and tortured and couldn't disclose their identity for these 43 years in the society. And they came up together, and their age is somewhere from 55 to 60s, something like that. Looking at that situation, we couldn't ignore their demand that these adjudication or these perpetrators must be brought into justice. Now, during the war, as I have started on 1971's 11 months war situation, on that subject matter I started my research in 93, when you know that in Bangladesh there was a Ghana Adalat.
Excuse me, sir. Congressman Banks is here.
Sure.
Wrap up your question real quickly.
Sure. My question is, so having been said all this, in a short, my question is, this panel, to what extent your aim and goal is to stop this type of terror organization in US and also in different parts globally? Because in Surah Al-Baqarah, if you see in ayat number 3, it says that those who comes for this intention to correct the society, they are not the Islam doer. They are not following the Islamic Quran and Sunnah.
Thank you, sir.
So
We'll
my
answer
question
this
is
after.
how far you can achieve the goal in stopping the finance of U.S. to patronize them. Thank you so much.
We'll have you guys answer that after. Please, everyone, give a hand for Congressman Jim Banks, who's been working closely with us on this issue. Thank you.
Well, how's it going?
Good.
Very good. It's great to be with you. Thanks to the Middle East Forum for hosting today's very important event on a very timely topic. I welcome the opportunity to discuss the threat posed by Jamaat-e-Islami's violent ideology and the impact it has on America's own national security. But before I begin, it's great to be with several friends, Seth Oldmixon, Sam Westrop, Abha Shankar, and Nadeem Nusrat. Over the past several years, the United States and our partners have made significant progress in the fight against terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the Middle East. However, Jamaat-e-Islami continues to operate in South Asia and grows their influence throughout the region regularly. It is no mystery to those in this room that Jamaat-e-Islami has been operating on a large scale with multiple international partners. Nevertheless, their actions have gone largely unnoticed on the world stage. The lack of awareness of such a dangerous group is extremely concerning. Jamaat-e-Islami is a violent, theocratic group that has committed violent acts against minority Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, and the Ahmadi Muslims. Through their violent actions, they seek to silence the voices of others and discourage participation in the democratic process. Jamaat-e-Islami has been especially active in South Asia, with violent factions found in Bangladesh and Pakistan. Much of the violence in Kashmir right now is linked to Jamaat-e-Islami and its terrorist partners. Domestically, the Islamic Circle of North America, also known as ICNA, is a thinly veiled partner group within the United States, posing as a community organization. ICNA invites Jamaat operatives to its conferences to raise funds for Jamaat charities and support the group's cause. ICNA wields considerable power over many Islamic communities, imposing its ideology on American Muslims through the guises of charity, community work, and political activism. We cannot ignore these trends any longer. We must prevent the spread of this threat before it starts impacting Americans at home. And that's why I introduced H.R. 160 earlier this year. This is a bipartisan resolution to call on USAID and the State Department to refrain from any partnerships or funding arrangements with organizations affiliated with radical Islamic groups. Awareness will be the first step toward finding a solution to eradicate this extremist ideology in the United States. Thank you for attending today's very important discussion. This is an important topic, and it deserves so much more attention on Capitol Hill than what it's been getting. I will now hand the discussion back over to Cliff and your panel, but it's great to be with all of you, if not just too briefly today. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Congressman Banks. And with that, to answer the previous answered question. Absolutely.
The question you have raised is very important. I have done a lot of research. I have come across the documents from the International Red Cross, which has catalogued over 250,000 cases of rape.
Now it's reaching 400,000.
Right.
So all those investigations.
And there were teams especially sent from the US to help those women in the early and late 1970s. There were hundreds of thousands of cases of mental trauma. If you look at this issue, it's why it is so important to pay attention to, because the perpetrators were Muslims and the victims were mainly Muslims. And this is the most dangerous thing. What has happened since the arrival of Muslim Brotherhood as well as Jamaat-e-Islami, they have created a different ideology which creates a mindset which we call in specific term the whole philosophy of takfiriyya, which means that if I am a Muslim, because Islam strictly forbids killing other humans, and it becomes even a greater sin if you kill your fellow Muslim. But what has happened since the arrival of these two ideologies is that if I was born as a Muslim, but I am not following certain rules laid down by the Quran and Sunnah, then actually I am not or may not be considered as a Muslim. If I am working with the US, for example, to stop terrorism, and I am working to prevent the promotion of terrorism, then I should be treated as an infidel. So my assassination becomes permissible by this ideology. What happened in Bangladesh? Pakistani military came from the West Pakistan, a country which was created in the name of Islam, and when people of Bangladesh or East Pakistan were the only majority Muslim province who had voted for Pakistan in 1947 and before that. But still Pakistani military, aided and supported by an Islamist organization, using their terrorist outfits Al-Badr and Al-Shams, they carried out massacres. I went to Bangladesh very recently, and I have witnessed a lot of things. I even went to the memorial of those who were killed. So what is important here is to put an end to this ideology. As I said, I used to teach in New Jersey, in my neighborhood, how this ideology works. I had a family which came from Pakistan, very liberal, very secular. The women of the family didn't cover their head, no scarves, no niqab, nothing. And they started attending this women's circle of ICNA and Jamaat-e-Islami. Men didn't do anything, they just went to their daily jobs. Then the women, slowly I observed the transformation. And within the next 3 months, all the women were covered, top to toe, and within the next 6 months, they even started taking niqab. and then they force their husband to go here, pray 5 times a day, and send their children to school. This is something which goes undetected for years and years and years, until it becomes a credible threat. Practicing your religion is not a problem. I think we should respect that. But it goes for everyone. When it becomes a problem is, as Sam said, the same thing happened in Europe, especially in Britain, for years. They created very strong-minded people with very hateful ideologies. They divided the world between us and them. And here the problem starts. I think it is still, we have the time to stop this in the USA, but it needs a lot of research. The US Constitution allows freedom of expression, freedom of religion, but when the same freedom becomes a threat to the freedoms of others, there is a time to put an end to this.
Exactly.
Anybody else want to speak to that? Anybody else want to speak to that?
I'll just say, real quickly, to your question about to what extent do we want to stop this? I mean, I think everyone on the panel certainly, obviously wants to stop this threat. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. As I noted and others as well, Jamaat-e-Islami is still not really well known or well understood here in the way that some of the more sensational groups are. And that's why I do think that Congressman Banks' leadership on this, with the introduction of HRS 160, is really crucial, because it takes that first step of really highlighting and outlining what this organization is and the kinds of acts that they commit. Because once we shine that light on it, then that opens up an opportunity to understand what is the best way through policy levers, through social awareness, to be able to ensure that that existing threat here does not metastasize into something like we see in Pakistan, where it's virtually runs free.
And also, I just wanted to add that investigative reports, by the Investigative Project on Terrorism and by the Middle East Forum, it has kind of drawn attention to ICNA and the other group, Jamaat-e-Islami group in the United States, is the Muslim Ummah of North America, so to their criminal, illegal activities here. And that has kind of drawn even attention by maybe investigative agencies, and that led to the investigation of Farid Khan of ICNA and his connections with terror financing. So I think it's, writing more reports, exposes, kind of, creating awareness on the, radical agenda of these groups, and then getting others kind of aware and involved, and finally defeating the threat that way.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir. My name is Dastagir Jahangir. I'm representing DC Bangla.com, a Bangladesh border. I have a very simple matter to discuss. It's not a question because everybody we know. Especially, let me give you one example. In Bangladesh, in Bangladesh, U.S. Embassy, whenever they make any social meeting or political meeting in their embassy, they always invite Jamaat-e-Islami there, the representation from Jamaat-e-Islami. Even Shoji Joy, the advisor of Bangladeshi Prime Minister, he even told last week, I think last month, about this matter, that this is a very serious matter to discuss. Thank you so much.
Any reactions to that?
I'll say something to that. I think that I obviously can't speak to or for the U.S. Embassy in Bangladesh or the State Department, but I do know that in the conversations that I've had in Washington and with a large number of people over the past several years that I've been working on this, it's become quite clear that there is, among a lot of very serious, very intelligent, very well-intentioned people, a lack of knowledge of Jamaat-e-Islami. And so, if you don't know, if somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm from the ABC group and we represent a large number of people, if you don't know anything else about them, you're going to take the meeting. So it's not unusual in that sense. And that's why, like I said, I think that these actions like HRS 160, like these forums, I should thank Cliff and the Middle Eastern Forum for convening this, are essential to raising that awareness of who Jamaat-e-Islami is, what their intentions, what their agenda are, so that when they try to get into these types of influential situations, there's at least an awareness among the officials there. They know who they're really dealing with.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Muhammad Ali Arafat. I just got here yesterday in the morning, and a big part of my job is to actually counter the preaching of Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh. I just want to supplement the question that was just raised. Actually, in the U.S. Embassy in Dhaka, we get invited all the time in different occasions. It's not that they don't know about Jamaat-e-Islami. They do, but Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh, I would say that they have the strongest position out of the rest of the countries there, and especially in the young generation. We have to always fight against it, in social media and all that, against the preaching. And we keep on getting threatened by them in the message and all that. And they just don't want to kill us. They want to kill us by giving enormous amount of pain. It's clearly they mention it in the threatening messages. But the thing is, Jamaat-e-Islami is very clever and cunning the way they operate. When they speak to the Western people, they speak in their language. They speak about human rights, they speak about the kind of catchy phrases that are very loved by the Westerners. And they try to do things in disguise. They present themselves in a way as if they believe in all the values of the Western world, democracy and all that. Speaking of that, I want to give an example. One of the Jamaati preachers, before this war crime trial had held, used to come to the television and speak. And he was saying something jokingly, like some preacher went to a village and it was a winter season. And in his preaching, he said that, in Bangladesh, the women, they wear sari. So lots of the blankets were, manufactured or made of the saris. So he preached that if it is made of saris, then it is haram, it is banned for the guys to, use it. And he said that, right? So at night he had to stay there, he had to stop over. So he was not given any blankets, so he had to be in cold, right? So then, after saying that joke, he said, so why do you preach something which is not, appropriate in timing? This is the preaching of the summer, you preach in the winter. So something they believe in, they won't always say that. They won't always, it comes out very clearly to what, how they, so I'll just wrap it up. So what they believe in is, apparently they'll show they want to participate in the democratic process, election, they have a party and all that. But they actually want to infiltrate into the key organization, defense, military, administration, and when they'll become powerful, they'll capture the government. This is how they operate there. So my question is, there's some staff also in the U.S. Embassy in Dhaka. We know clearly they belong to these ideas very strongly, but they're in disguise. They won't expose themselves. So somehow I see that, our friends in the U.S. Embassy in Dhaka, they're kind of in love affair with this Jamaati people. And many of them were going through this war crime trial. They got invitation even during that time. They were not captured by then. It was already known. So my just to wrap it up, how can we send this message to our friends in the U.S. Embassy? How quickly and how effectively? By convincing the policymaker in D.C. This is very important because they get this shelter from the U.S. Embassy all the time. That is one of their stronghold, I would say. So that's all I say. Thank you.
I will actually partially speak to that. So I'm the director of the Washington Project. One of my main jobs is to talk to congressmen, people at the State Department, Homeland Security, FBI, whoever it is, and sort of bring our work and our research to them. We have been working with Congressman Banks. We've been working with every person on this panel, among others that are not here, to start to bring that message. Now, I wish I could tell you that everybody gets it, and in next month everything will be fine and everything will be changed. That's not going to happen. But I think that There's sort of a lot of things that have happened, with the increased violence that we've seen in Bangladesh, with what they've been doing in Pakistan, with what they've been doing in Kashmir, with groups like Middle East Forum, like Liberty South Asia, like the Investigative Project on Terrorism, like South Asian Minorities Alliance Foundation, starting to raise this issue to people in Congress, in the State Department, Homeland Security, so on and so forth. We're at least starting that ball rolling. And I'll let anybody else.
I would like to add, one of the issues I myself faced, I have a friend in Bangladesh who I used to work with in the UK. She is a kind of person who has a mind of her own, very bold on those systematic problems within the society dealing with South Asian cultures, and she received a lot of threats from extremist Bengalis living in Britain. When the current government came in power, she went back to Bangladesh and she runs a talk show there. Then she received threats from people living in New York, British US citizens living in New York of Bangladeshi origin. The problem is, in 1971, a lot of people who collaborated with the Pakistani military, they left the country. And there were a lot of Bengalis too, who sided with Pakistani military. And they decided to settle in Britain. British gave them political asylum, and so did the Americans. And I personally know a lot of people who still have their sympathies with Jamaat-e-Islami and who are still opposed to the creation of Bangladesh, even though they are Bengalis. And in the last few years, they have become very active, and they have created a network which, of course, allows them in this democratic system to express their views and create some room for them. And this is where we come in, as Cliff said, South Asian Minorities Alliance Foundation, because when it comes to resistance to this extremism, I think it should come from within. Muslims should stand up, Bengalis, Pakistanis, Indian Muslims, Middle Eastern Muslims, Egyptians. We can expect the world to come and help us, British Americans. But at the end of the day, it is a job of the Muslim community to tell the world, Osama bin Laden or Hassan al-Banna or Maududi is not my face. I want my religion to be liberated from these people. And this is where we need to stand. And if the pressure comes from the Bengali community, and they go and talk to the State Department, their congressmen, that these people are not our representatives. These are murderers, they are thugs, they are extremists. They do not deserve any other status as the ISIS has or Taliban have. So end of the day, I think it will be our job to make it happen.
Thank you.
One more thing that I wanted to add to the...
Come on, we got other people have questions.
By the way, thank you, Chris, and a great panel. As an executive director of South Asian Minority Alliance, as Nadeem said, that it has to be from the Muslim community. But the important thing is that there's a large Muslim population in South Asia. And as Sam said, this threat has kind of enveloped Europe. What other organizations, especially Muslim, moderate, conservative-led organizations, which is one of ours, that Nusrat, are there that we can work together, because this has to grow from within. What can we do to be more proactive now so that we don't face the same issues, because it's going to get very hard, not just for Muslims, but other minorities, because Act of One has an impact on the Sikhs, on the Muslims, on Hindus, on other Christians of different faiths. So could you, Sam, just elaborate more on that, another organization we can partner up with, please?
Yeah, of course. So I think one of the things that has been very apparent over the last few months has been the awakening of American Indian communities to the threat posed by Jamaat and other Islamist groups, because they have seen the manner in which American Islamism and Islamism all around the world has decided to side with the Pakistani government's narrative on Kashmir. They saw now in retrospect how American Islam works with the Turks hand in hand with the Turkish regime, but doesn't help the Kashmiris, so it doesn't help the Kurdish. So they see that there's clearly not authentic, principled stance going on here with regards to persecuted peoples, whether they actually be persecuted or not. They see American Islamism choosing its battles very carefully, choosing its foreign friends very carefully. And I think I now see American Hindu organizations and American Hindu activists deeply concerned about the threat. They're only just beginning to understand how pervasive and big it is. I see those in the Middle East now more aware of Jamaat's influence here in the West and how that affects politics and international relations in South Asia. There are many new allies that I think those who are concerned with Jamaat can rely on today that there were not a few days ago, a few months ago, a few years ago. Muslim allies in this field are difficult. There's of course the reformist Muslim movement. They are a very small bunch of people, very committed, very hard-working, very right, but they are small in number nonetheless. It is partly, it's our duty, it is everyone's duty to bolster their numbers. And so despite their size, these should be the people that anyone who's concerned with the Jamaati threat is reaching out to. Because if we want a non-Islamist representation of Islam in the US, then working with reformers and promoting them wherever possible is obviously key to that. There are, of course, all those Muslim communities who steer clear of politics throughout the US. They may well be inherently anti-Islamist, but they need to understand what Jamaat is, how it operates. There's no reason that a community of African American Muslims should have any interest or involvement in Pakistani or Bangladeshi Islamism, but it is in their interest for us to educate them, to find out. They just don't know it yet. It's the same with, if for example you have Sufi groups from Africa or from the Middle East. Yes, Jamaat and Pakistan and South Asia, it's not their usual beat, but this does affect them. But this Islamism will ultimately affect the right to practice their faith as they wanted. So the more Muslims of both of conservative and reformist bent that we reach out to and we work with on this issue, the better, because this is not just about a few South Asian countries, this is about Islam, this is about Islamism, this is about fundamental liberties. So I encourage all the collaboration with us.
And with that, I would love to take more questions. We are already over time. So thank you very much for coming, and